Great. Welcome, everyone. We're recording this session. As Zoom has just informed you, we've also enabled the live transcript for closed captioning, and you may find that option on the control bar that usually appears at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're extending the warmest welcome to the third ASLE Spotlight in this series on the topic of climate justice. I'm John Brannigan, Professor of English at University College Dublin. For those of you joining an ASLE event for the first time, a special welcome. We're so glad you have joined us today and invite you to help to sustain and further the work of the association by becoming an ASLE member if you're not already a member. ASLE acknowledges that its office is located within Indokina, the ancestral and unceded homeland of the Abenaki people along the Kwenituka and Ashwelot watersheds, and in the shadow of Mount Monadnock. We recognize that this land has been cared for by the Abenaki for at least 12,600 years, including by the Sokoke, Pennacook, and other Wabanaki peoples. ASLE offers this statement as a way of affirming its commitment to recognizing and supporting Native history and culture in the Monadnock region and all regions where our members and officers dwell, past, present, and future. I'm delighted to be co-hosting this event with Kyle Keeler. Kyle is Assistant Professor of Environmental Sciences and Studies at Lafayette College. His work has appeared in American Literature, ASLE, Slate Magazine, and elsewhere. He's currently working on a co-edited collection, Unsettling Environments, Indigenous Sovereignties, Settler Colonialism, and Environmental Humanities, with Tom Lynch, April Anson, and Izzy Lockhart. He's also drafting a book manuscript, Land Acts, Lands Agency and Native Sovereignties in American Literature, Law and History, focusing on lands agency and influence on American legislation and cultural production. I'll hand over to Kyle.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. As John just said, I'm Kyle, and I'm excited to be co-hosting this event with John Brannigan, who teaches English and Irish literatures at University College Dublin. He is the author of several books, including New Historicism and Cultural Materialism, Race in Modern Irish Literature and Culture, and Archipelagic Modernism. He is co-director of the Cultural Values of Coastlines project, funded by the Irish Research Council, and he's recently worked on developing cultural perspectives on marine and coastal ecosystems on large-scale European research projects such as Land-to-Sea and Marbethis. ASLE's leadership launched this series in 2021 to elevate the work of our members in creative writing, scholarship, public engagement, and more. We're excited to continue to foster connections with new audiences through these spotlight episodes. So by way of logistical information, right before we get started here, introducing everyone that we have with us, we're going to ask that you remain on mute, and then we'll have some time for questions later, and we'll ask you to use the chat to post your questions, and then John and I will present them to our panelists. So please try to keep questions during that period concise, because we only have brief minutes together. And with that, we're going to begin introducing all of our panelists. Our first presenters are Jane Robbins Mize and Isabel Lane. Isabel Lane's research explores intersections between industrial systems, nuclear and carceral, and the environment through literature and the arts. She's currently a lecturer in the Harvard College Writing Program, and she is the co-founder of Products of Our Environment, an environmental justice and prison abolition collective of scholars and artists in and outside of prison. Jane Robbins Mize is an assistant professor of liberal arts in the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her work focuses on the colonization and industrialization of North America, human-water relations, and the carceral state. She is a member of Products of Our Environment. I'll turn it over to Jane and Isabel.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having us. We are excited to be here to share with you a project that we have been working on. Isabel and I are here representing Products of Our Environment, which, as Kyle said, is a collective made up of incarcerated and non-incarcerated scholars, writers, and artists. We have worked on several projects together, and today we'll be sharing a bit about our graphic short story, which was published this fall with the Vera Institute, called Evacuation Plan. Before I dive in to how we did this project across the prison wall, I want to mention that we received generous grants from the ASLE Collaborative Work Grant, as well as from the Penn Program for Environmental Humanities and the Intersecting Energy Cultures, to make sure that we paid our writers and artists. So the way this piece came together began in a working group meeting, a kind of casual working group meeting we had. The incarcerated writer Jared Bozadai and Isabel, who's here with us, co-wrote the story together. It was David Pello and I, who are also members of the collective, conducted some research, did some editorial support, collaborated in writing, and then together we worked with the incarcerated artist Adam Roberts and his non-incarcerated creative partner C.M. Campbell, who then transformed the writing into graphic short fiction. Evacuation Plan is a research-based fictional comic that tells the story of two men trying to understand the environmental risks they face while incarcerated. On the opening page, the guys are killing time in the yard and staring at the nuclear plant that is looming across the river. They are prompted by fears of meltdown to embark on a journey for answers that leads to the prison's law library. They file freedom of information requests, and they imagine safety plans for themselves. All told, the Evacuation Plan uses 8 pages of visual storytelling to underscore how incarcerated people are held in place, not just vulnerable to a potential nuclear meltdown, but also to wildfires, floods, extreme heat, and infectious disease, as is indicated on this page we've shared with you. In the end, our characters realize that the most effective evacuation plan for incarcerated people would be a decarceral evacuation plan, one that allows the incarcerated to be free. Our hope is that this piece illuminates an experience of environmental injustice that is often overlooked in our discussions of climate crisis.
Thanks, Jane Robbins. Now I'm just going to briefly give you a little bit of background about the project. So Evacuation Plan, while fictional, is grounded in a real world example of how incarcerated populations are vulnerable to environmental and climate disaster in especially pronounced ways. In our comic, we focus on the Indian Point nuclear plant and its history, and its proximity to Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York. In the early 2010s, Indian Point became the focus of environmental and anti-nuclear groups who hoped to stop its relicensing. The fight against relicensing brought together a range of perspectives. In the wake of the Fukushima nuclear meltdown and accident, eyes were on Indian Point, particularly because of its proximity to New York City. But it also became a flashpoint for debates around nuclear energy as an alternative to direct carbon emissions. As the New York Times reported, Indian Point is shutting down. That means more fossil fuel. In fact, when Indian Point was finally shuttered in 2021, it did lead to an increase in fossil fuel reliance across New York State. According to one expert, from a climate change point of view, it's been a real step backward. Yet, in addition to critiques of nuclear power generation and its environmental and human harms through waste and vulnerability to accident, the history of Indian Point is also an example, to our mind, of how environmental justice and climate justice don't always cleanly align. In this case, and in Evacuation Plan, we see how environmental justice for the incarcerated folks at Sing Sing meant a step back for New York's climate goals. Nevertheless, we felt it was important to highlight how the complex interplay of environmental and climate effects play out in the lives of people behind bars, some of which you can see on this page that we have displayed, and in the lives of people otherwise incapacitated by detention and incarceration. So we'll just end with a few words about what's next for products of our environment. We're in the early stages of developing a second comic on the use of electricity in prisons, from the electric chair and early security lighting to lethal electrified fences and solar panels in correctional facilities.
So with that, we'll pass it along. We're looking forward to hearing your questions and thoughts. And I just wanted to signal that we would be happy to share any thoughts you want to pass along directly to our incarcerated collaborators, Adam and Jared.
Thank you very much, Jane and Isabel. Next, we'll hear from Parisa Rinaldi. Parisa Nurani Rinaldi is Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies at St. Mary's College of Maryland. She's interested in collaborative inquiry for sustainability transitions. Parisa has published on water for energy frontiers, Latin American transition discourses such as Buen Vivir and post-extractivism, the coloniality of living with oil, and the discursive treatment of uncertainty and expertise in Colombia's public debate on fracking. So over to you, Parisa.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to participate today in this exciting panel and podcast. Today, I'm sharing with you a story map, which is not my personal work. It's the product of my students' work. And I just want to say that if the students at St. Mary's College of Maryland weren't as excellent as they are, I wouldn't be here today presenting this for you. So please keep that in mind as I share this work. So I'm going to share a little bit about this story map that's titled Coastal Community Resilience, a story map of resilience and adaptation through personal testimonies and community engagement among rising seas. This is a product of a course by the same title, Coastal Community Resilience, and it is a completely student-led project from start to finish. So I want to share a little bit about how it came about and then what's contained there so that maybe you'll be inspired to go and take a look yourself. And also a little bit about the process of engaging students in work that explores the climate crisis and climate change and coastal resilience through the lens of the arts and humanities and community engagement. And then also a little bit about what we have planned for this year. So to start, a little bit of background on the class. St. Mary's College of Maryland is in Southern Maryland, and we're on the coast. So we have a lot of students who are deeply concerned with and coming from coastal communities themselves, from both the western and eastern shores of Maryland primarily. And they perhaps expected this class to be a little more science-oriented than it was. It was a very interdisciplinary course where we talked a lot about issues of coastal heritage and livelihoods. We talked a lot about uneven development, placemaking and placekeeping, as well as co-construction of knowledge with communities and what does it mean to be a community? What does resilience mean? Adaptation, vulnerability, all of these concepts, but particularly where did the term and concept of resilience come from? What is the context in terms of complexity theory, but then how has it become institutionalized? And also how can we recover the meaning of resilience? And throughout the course, the students were also encouraged to reach out to members of resilient coastal communities to kind of get a sense of what it means to live in and form resilient communities in these specific places, in this region, in this type of environment and ecosystem. So this story map was actually a choice that they made to present the results, to explore the conversations that they had with community members, and to also present back the patterns and themes that they observed in their interviews back to the community members. So if you get a chance to scroll through, you'll see a beautiful song that was written from an interview, some descriptions of the coastal communities that were represented, a poem that was also inspired by an interview, and then many audio clips from the interviews themselves, as well as pictures and a record of a community workshop that the students coordinated and planned themselves and put on. And I just want to share a little excerpt from a student's blurb on the song that she wrote. So Sarah Jibb was a senior who wrote a song based on her interview with Bonnie Peltier. And she said, I found that other students were hearing similar stories from their interviewees, and slowly the idea began to form that coastal living is a labor of love. And that's a story worth being told. I wanted to take Pelletier's words and transform them into something you'd hear a community choir or boat crew sing with this folky lyricism. The lyrics are repetitive and declarative, insisting that despite the trials and tribulations the river brings, it is a treasured home to so many. Despite government regulations, oyster and fish population decreases, and sea level rise, watermen and their families strap on their muck boots and make do. It's a powerful thing to choose this lifestyle and to find the value in working with the land in this way. Watermen are often unsung heroes of our coastal communities and economies, so I wanted to lift their voices and give them time in the spotlight in this song. So I encourage you to listen to this song. It's called A Way of Life. It's based on the name of a boat. And I'll just conclude by sharing that this class continues on. So this was held in spring of 24, and now spring of 25, we have another iteration of the class. And some of the students who were involved last year are now working as interns or interns for credit and supporting further iterations of community engagement and ethnographic work within the region. So we'll see what they come up with this semester. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for sharing that really impressive and important community gaze pedagogical practice, Parisa. That's awesome. Next up, we have Leanne Dunic. Leanne is a multidisciplinary artist whose work is published and forthcoming in Orion Magazine. She teaches fiction and hybrid forms at Simon Fraser University's The Writers Studio and is the current writer in residence at the University of the Fraser Valley. Leanne is a PhD candidate at Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. Leanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kyle, and thanks to everyone here at ASLE for giving us this opportunity to share our works. I'm sharing my book, Wet, which just came out last year. It's a novel in verse that also has photographs, like the one you see on the screen right now. It's centered around a climate event that happened in Southeast Asia in 2015, and that is known as the Southeast Asia haze, which was the result of some slash and burn tactics happening in Indonesia that got out of control, and then the rainy season of the area didn't come, and so there were a lot of fires resulting in the haze. And so this book explores desire for justice, environmental health, human connection, as well as non-human connection in relation to the exploitation of migrant workers amid the eco and social crisis. And so there's a lot of entanglement, there are a lot of intersections, and amongst the many narratives, I had to find a form to hold the complexities of the situation. And so the book is fragmented, as I said, with photographs, and it kind of functions as like distillations that come together to form a constellation of what was happening in Southeast Asia in 2015. So I'm going to read just a selection of pages from throughout the book. And just so you know, the narrator is a fashion model who's Chinese American, and she has come to Singapore to get some money, hopefully, but that's thwarted by this environmental crisis. The view, a cotton battened sky. Visibility, 2 blocks. Below, a gouged out urban hole. A metal dragon lowers a slat, then another, in a slow game of Tetris. Migrant workers wear canary-colored hard hats and boots, towels around necks, torn fabric for masks. I share this flat with a 15-year-old model from Poland and one from Russia who's the same age as me. A domestic helper from China sleeps on a futon behind the living room bookcase. My cousin told me about Mao's campaign during the Great Leap Forward to kill the 4 pests: flies, rats, mosquitoes, sparrows. The people banged pots incessantly to prevent sparrows from resting. Soft stones dropped from the sky. What other animals fell? 55 million people, my ancestors. In this block, poisoned bread is left on the sidewalk for pigeons, for cats, for dogs, the hungry. Nature is failing. She burns and burns, forgetting what it feels like to be wet. And me, weathering, the salted cup waiting for damp. Nearby forests scorch. Not a sky-born drop, yet water pours from the faucets. I only shower when I have to. Bathroom tiles like chiclets. Under a layer of eggshell paint, a line of ants embalmed. Cats wail in the alley. Should I leave a dish of water out for the animals, or will that only breed mosquitoes? Who gets to survive? Fires consume bodies. We wear white masks to filter toxic breaths. A person shouldn't have to sleep behind a living room bookshelf. A 15-year-old shouldn't be dating someone in their 30s. I shouldn't have to flirt with men my father's age to get a gig to sell people stuff they don't need. Why do we put up with such things? And these people working on this high-rise, I have the option of going home if I want to. Do these men? Do my roommates? Dear pigeon, your body is a rain-filled cloud. 2 strips of night band each wing. The aurora of your neck must magnetize you to earth. Why are you so anxious? You've made maps, but the city changes. You're famished, but the bread you've eaten crumbles your bones. A flutter in my lungs. Each inhale a hazed breath, dust and blood in my handkerchief. The city has sold out of masks. Outside, the sound of metal smashing metal, heat index in the low 40s. Workers wear long sleeves and cloths to protect their necks, their faces black with dust and sun. Everyone else, preserved indoors. And I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leanne, for that beautiful reading. And we'll move on now to Kamala Platt. And Kamala is an interdisciplinary public activist, literary and cultural studies scholar, a writer and artist, and a contingent professor. She strives to practice ecological and cultural reciprocity in work and life. Her poetry collections include Gravity Prevails, Weeds Lovers, and On the Line. Dr. Platt teaches creative writing, Pen Project prison writing internships, environmental justice poetics, and Shekinah poetry online for the School of Humanities, Arts, and Cultural Studies in Arizona State University's New College. Kamala, over to you.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone involved in creating this ASLE spotlight and to our audience. I am excited to see how much our projects are intersecting in climate justice. I speak from San Antonio, Texas, Yanaguana, where a continuous indigenous presence extends back 14,000 years and forward in support of for continuity of water, land, spirit, cosmos, and communities of kin. The afterword of environmental justice poetics describes current protection and protest, especially for migratory water birds, heritage trees, and fights over our land with code compliance. Environmental justice poetics, cultural representations of environmental racism from Chicanas and women in India would not be what it is without its cover. And while I hope you read the book, I'm happy to have you judge this book by its cover. We're grateful for the murals that provided inspiration for my fellow eco-justice artist, Mary Agnes Rodriguez painting. One mural is from Del Rio, Texas, a short drive away, and near where our international river valley is in the state and now the federal admin's crosshairs. And the other mural is from Kalahandi, a tribal community in Odisha in eastern India. I believe this book's cultural poetics, the 20th century expressive work and analysis created to expose and confront inequitable environmental harm and to protect health, sustenance, and equilibrium, has much to offer the 21st century's paradigms and blueprints for climate justice. The poetics reveals the political will to address and transform impossible situations, enticing those of us working toward climate justice to consider the legacies we've inherited and how they might speak to tomorrow. The book is divided into 2 parts, 13 chapters, based on thematic and formal considerations. Part 1, New Social Movement Poesis, Environmental Justice, Transformative Culture, draws on sociological and cultural theories of new social movements and identities to discuss narrative, expressive, and iconographic texts, resistance from organizations including the Narmada Dam, opposition groups, people organized in defense of the earth and her resources, PODER in Austin, Texas, and the United Farm Workers. These groups portray issues picked up in subsequent chapters on the Mothers of East LA and Las Madres, the Chipko movement, and the Bhopal gas-affected victims support groups. Part 2 focuses on literary work by authors including Mahashweta Devi, Nina Sabal, Vandana Shiva, Elena Maria Veramontes, Ana Castillo, Cherie Maraga, Maria Elena Lucas, and more. These chapters present eco-justice in relation to discernment of subject identities and self-reflexive representation. They repeat earlier calls for principles of environmental justice that affirm the, quote, sacredness of Mother Earth, ecological unity, the interdependence of all species, and the right to be free from ecological destruction. They voice resistance to corporation and government mis- and disrepresentation, demonization, and intersectional racism. They identify how social identities can give rise to environmental vulnerabilities and voice the need to hear from Indigenous and other disenfranchised peoples, all issues of concern in climate justice. This book compels scholars, activists, artists, and planetary citizens of all ilk to reconsider their relationships with Earth and each other. This regenerative study of expressive work by Mexican American and South Asian women engaged at the nexus of ecology and justice imparts a route toward a calm climate in an equitable world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kamala. At this point, John and I will each ask our presenters a question. And then after that, as time allows, we'll ask 1 or 2 audience members who have asked questions in the chat to unmute and pose their question or if they prefer, they can let me and John know and we can read that question for them. So I'll kick us off with our first question. For all of the presenters, how important are concepts and practices of place in your work, especially in relation to places that are often unrecognized, erased, or ignored, and perhaps not even seen as places, such as prisons and seas? And how do you see your work contributing to place keeping and place making?
I'd say very briefly that a lot of my work in my book is about defending place.
I wanted to share, this is Parisa speaking. I wanted to share that I was very excited to see this question as we were preparing for this podcast, because I structured my course on coastal community resilience kind of leading up to this grand session where we would explore both placekeeping and placemaking in coastal communities, and the tensions that often come up when thinking about areas. I think you said it so beautifully, places that are not considered places, or places that are not, static in the imaginary as much as cities are, perhaps. These dynamic places like marshlands. We were just talking about how marshes migrate, and so beyond just sea level rise, you have these coastal areas that are constantly shifting. So how do you talk about placekeeping when you're talking about places that are perhaps disappearing, perhaps, shifting drastically? Is it literally keeping the lines that separate land from water, or is it something else, right? And then placemaking and all of the creative and even, entrepreneurial and artistic energy that is usually associated with that term. How can we think about that in coastal landscapes, right? This is something we definitely talked about. And as I was thinking about this question, I saw that the students had in their story map a little paragraph on these concepts. So I wanted to just read that paragraph. And they wrote, a large part of this course is understanding the concepts of placekeeping and placemaking, the ecological, cultural meaning of a space across multiple groups of people, temporalities, and histories. We examine this through a coastal lens, stringing together the narratives and perspectives of people who are directly impacted by the coast, their lives being tied not only to the spirit of place they have created over the years, but the ongoing issues that involve coastal disruption to their lives. The coast to them is near and dear to their hearts. It is a place to make memories, a part of their work life and income, and is an area where they fully appreciate and understand the work of the water and the marsh, and how these are two forces that work with and against each other as climate change is progressing. And so I thought that was a beautiful little excerpt that shows that these concepts are central to the work that we do, but they're not always so clear. And it's not, when even the term community, right? I think they touched on the fact that a spirit of place connects more than just the community that is living there at the present moment, but the histories and memories of communities that have shaped those landscapes for a very long time.
I can say a few words about prison and sort of how we were thinking about place as we started to before actually we thought of doing a comic. But first we were selected to be part of this intersecting energy cultures working group that was very site-based, but our group hadn't really kind of selected a specific site. You know, others were looking at Aberdeen and, you know, let's like all sorts of other places, like really across, you know, across the globe. And we really initially thought of our project as something like a kind of anti-placemaking. Prisons are places that, as a group mostly committed to, I mean, most of the members committed to carceral abolition, that we, you know, certainly don't want to preserve, that we see as artificial. We thought initially we would essentially try to build solidarity through mailings to different prisons in different states, to women's and men's facilities. And we did pursue that and had some really interesting successes, but it was interesting that we ultimately found ourselves grounded in you know, in New York prisons, Sing Sing specifically. And I don't know if Jane Robbins has anything she wants to add, maybe not. But, you know, we have also thought a lot about prisons as spaces that are often very difficult to see from the outside. So I'll leave it there, but feel free to pick up on that thread.
Yeah, I'll just add that yeah, we're definitely thinking about the comic as a form that allows us to communicate some of that spatial and temporal stuckness that incarcerated folks experience uh, through visual verbal storytelling. And we're working with an artist, Adam Roberts, who has made many comics about life in prison. And so we're thinking about, you know, the comic and its relation to placemaking as well.
I'll say, I'll speak to the part of the question that was about like places that have been ignored. And I think when we're doing any kind of work in climate justice, we're trying to give light to people, organisms, places that are ignored. But with wet, I think I was kind of doing something a little bit different with regards to place, because it's situated in Singapore, which I do not think is a place that is particularly ignored, but it is a place that I felt like I needed to dismantle some perceptions of, because it is often portrayed like Crazy Rich Asians was a portrayal of it that I haven't watched, so I shouldn't say anything about it really, but I think that, you know, it's portrayed as a glamorous, prosperous, rich success story for a country. And I think the fact that a third of Singapore's workforce being migrant workers is something that deserves attention and needs to be shown, because that fact, like, so my book tries to reveal the transcultural and transnational class dynamics that are happening there, that are often just sort of like tucked under the rug, and I feel like is actually a part of Singapore's identity. But so that part gets ignored. But so I guess I was using that to sort of dismantle any ideations of what Singapore is.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your insights in response to that question. And we have a related question which follows from that and picks up on the various references in your presentations to collaboration. There are some really nice acknowledgements of, you know, working with your students or working with prisoners or working with communities and so on. And so we wanted to ask you about the possibilities and the challenges of contributing to community building, of collaborating and working with communities, and what kinds of action or mediation do you incorporate into your creative and critical practice to engage with issues of race, class, gender, privilege. We heard about resilience and vulnerability. So we wondered if any of the panelists had insights into that.
Yeah, I can jump in and talk about collaborating with incarcerated people who are, of course, some of the most vulnerable in this nation to social and environmental injustices. One way we approach that is through very intentional, non-hierarchical working group methods. And part of that means resisting academic mandates or academic timelines. Those of us who are not incarcerated in the working group are all in academia in some way. So it can be tempting to think of our work as deliverables, think about how we could narrate it in relation to our research, and we really try to resist that and try to come up with goals and intentions collectively, outside of the expectations of the institution. And that resisting institutional expectations also happens on the inside, resisting the temptation to become an official group that can go into the prison and be kind of verified and validated by the Department of Corrections. We also resist that and try to operate outside of the the nonprofit or the service-oriented prison funding programs, which isn't to say that there isn't some good work being done in those spaces, but it's one way that we try to create equity and trust across our working group.
Oh,
Go ahead.
great. I'll just quickly add, second everything that Jane Robbins said, but also to thinking about privilege and, almost like a kind of capabilities model. I mean, we have very different capabilities across our group. Just access to information, access to institutional privilege, like some of us are contingent, some of us are, full professors, some of us are waiting for parole decisions and have no access to the internet. So, really thinking about the strengths that each of us can bring and being responsive in ways to, not try to shape what we do around, to kind of build on what Jane Robbins said, like around our academic deliverables, but, the interests and real expertise that some of our collaborators have. And then even just something as simple as using our group and some of our academic affiliations to apply for funding and use that funding to pay artists to offset any costs that the people inside might have. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that because it really resonates with my current teaching in the Penn Project writing, prison writing, in which we have students who are interns who respond to work that's coming in from a prison in New Mexico. And they, of course, they don't get to know who each other are or anything, but they really connect over the work that they're reading and responding back to. And I think that any way we can, intervene in the powers that are really horrific in the incarceration systems, and seemingly increasing, it's just, so great. So I want to thank you for that. And then in terms of my own book and that work, I think the cultural poetics itself and the way that I tried to work with it intervenes in these issues of power, but where I really felt that coming in was actually after publication. I felt it most acutely, and mostly in the trying to make the book accessible for those that were not part of academic institutions. I hadn't been able to, I didn't have academic support to publish it open access, which I'd hoped for. And so it isn't that available, and public libraries haven't taken up the suggestion to buy the book. So even people in the book can't see the whole book, but there are plans for a paperback like 2 years after the publication. And there are parts of it that are available at Degrader's website. And some of those are the most important. I mean, it's a very long book, so actually going there and reading some of the work is one way to make it available. But that's been really the foremost thing in terms of those kind of unfortunate relations that I've had. And I will say, just pay attention to the chat that Degrader is offering a 50% discount. It's still very expensive, but for the rest of the month in celebration of the ASLE Spotlight. So I have been appreciative when we can work out things that do intervene in some of these unfortunate power relations.
I also wanted to share some thoughts on this question about the possibilities and challenges of contributing to community building, collaborating, and working with communities. And I was thinking about it a little bit, and thinking about is it always the case that what we're doing when we have community engagement, is it always the case that we are participating in community building? Because I think that requires a lot of dedicated commitment over time. And I feel like I've been a part of community building efforts, but not necessarily in the types of products that I just shared. I think that we collaborate with communities who are resilient, and we collaborate with communities who are engaged in community building themselves. But we get to also kind of bring our own talents and capacities to those processes that are already underway most of the time. And I wanted to mention that this project that I talked about today, the story map, was really largely inspired by another project that's mentioned in the story map, which is the Proyecto Anfibio, the Amphibious Livelihoods Project in Colombia. And I'd like to thank my collaborators, Cecilia and Clara Roa and Alejandro Camargo, and our team in Colombia for the insights that we've gained together on that project that's been ongoing for the past 2 years. And that has been going on in 2 port cities in Colombia, in Barranquilla and Buenaventura, on the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. And we've been collaborating with fishing communities in those cities and determining the questions of our research together, determining the results of the research together. I was excited to see the graphic short story, because that's one of the things that that we're co-creating with the communities in that project as well. Some educational materials on what it means to kind of the traditions of the artisanal fishing communities in these cities. But so the story map, I think, takes some of the experiences from that project, because in that project we were able to sit down with community members from the very start and together explore some materials on reconceptualizing leadership in this time of transition. And I think that was really key for us, like that moment of really exploring some concepts together on an equal ground, and really, thinking about each one of us as a leader, and what do we bring, and what are the different perspectives and knowledges that we bring, before we even got into the questions that we wanted to address. That was that was key, although we didn't do that with the communities in Maryland, the kind of experience and conversations translated over into the class. And then I also want to say that you're right, the students themselves are collaborators. They themselves are a community too that we need to learn to work with. And then there are many layers when you're working with students who are then working with communities or community members. And so it's not always a given that all of your students are going to be ready or excited about that, or know what to do or how to engage. So I think those conversations in class and then really thoughtful curating of experiences is really key.
Leanne, go ahead.
Well, I was going to respond to Amy's question in the chat, if that is cool. Yeah, so Amy asked about the role of non-human or more than human in terms of place and community making. And so I'm a teacher, and I feel like that's a big part of my practice with regards to like, though I'm teaching creative writing, I am also teaching students to appreciate non-human perspectives. And in my writing is very present. Well, just non-humans are very present, and that's very important to me, just to raise awareness. Like, you know, with these LA fires, they're reporting how many houses were lost or people, but I'm just like thinking about all the wildlife and plants and things that are getting burnt up, and we're living in the Parisa. So this is like something I'm always thinking about, and I wish for more representation of more than human lives in the way we tell our stories, be it the news or novels, whatever it is. So with all my work, I tried to really bring that in. There are just all kinds of life on every page, and I hope that that will be embodied by the reader to take note of the more than human lives in their sphere. So, for example, yesterday I had a student tell me what they wanted to write a story in which a character decimates wasp populations because wasps are bad. And I was like, oh, this is good. I have this opportunity to debunk that idea and teach this student how wasps are valuable. Not that we should have a utility or anything for any creature, but just to help change their perspective of how they value a wasp. So that's how I see my work going. I'm trying to just put a value on every life. And there was a line I read today where it's like, who gets to survive? And I want people to think about that, like, really, who gets to survive? I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
I'd love to jump in. I know we only have a couple minutes. I just, in terms of the non-human in the carceral setting, animals certainly do find their way into the prison, and that's something that we delight in as a collective and talk about very often. The separation from animals also very acute, and I just want to plug really Adam's comic, The Company of Dogs. Adam is a dog trainer. He works with Labradors, and Isabel just held it up, has been training service dogs for a long time. So here's where you can buy that comic. And if you want to read more about his experience in the program, he published a piece with the Marshall Project, which I'll also link here. So Adam is like the person to talk to when it comes to thinking about animals in prison. And yeah, I hope you enjoy these resources.
Thank you. And are there any further responses to Amy's question in the chat?
I'm hesitant to jump in because I think Jane Robbins gave the second half of what I was going to say, which is that there are lots of lovely, like really powerful human animal or non-human human relationships behind bars. And I would plug, there's a really nice episode of the podcast Ear Hustle. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but all about relationships with animals in prison, essentially. And sometimes people have pets, things like that. But I do want to say too that in our research around electricity and the history of electricity and punishment, we found a lot about how the earliest experiments with electricity were on the bodies of recently hanged men and on horses and dogs. So I think there's a pretty powerful history there, and also potential for like a real kind of solidarity, like solidarity built out of a pretty painful dehumanization of both incarcerated people and animals. So I'm more importantly, definitely by Adam's really lovely comic about dogs in prison, but something to think about as well.
I'll just say that I'm a fiction editor at Tahoma Literary Review, and last issue we published a story that was about incarcerated people getting a dog given to them, and if they were able to care for the dog, that would like up their possibility for getting out, and if they did anything wrong or whatever, they would punish them by getting rid of the dog. And it was such a like powerful story, but another example of incarcerated people engaging with animals, but fictional.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so part of the pain in that piece that Adam writes about of puppies behind bars is that the animals, the dogs are eventually taken away and usually given to police as like support animals. So there's a kind of a cruel irony there, and yeah, and a painful one. That's I'll check out that piece. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much. We're coming to the end of the allotted time for this event, so please join me in thanking our panelists for sharing insights into their work on climate justice and for this really fruitful discussion. I feel we could keep going with the questions for a lot longer and a lot of discussion, so thank you so much for that really fruitful discussion. Please also join me in thanking Aubrey for organizing this event, to Amy for managing and supporting the event so well, and to Kyle for co-hosting as well. Just a reminder that the next ASLE Spotlight session will take place on Friday, February the 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on reproducing animality. And please do consider joining the association if you're not already a member. And just to note, Leanne has put into the chat as well for ASLE in July, there should be a roundtable called Atmospheric Pollution as Materiality and Metaphor in Asian Media, which you can look forward to. Thank you all.